So, as we've been saying, there's been a 10th consecutive drop in dairy prices, including a 10% fall in whole milk powder, vital to our economy. It comes after New Zealand refused to sign the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal in Hawaii without more gains for dairy farmers. Trade Minister Tim Groser is now back in New Zealand and joins me now. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to have you here.
Well, Paul, just before we start, we need to clear something up. Given your introduction to me about knowing how to use my knife and fork properly, last time I was on your show, you and Hillary claimed that I made the word econometrician up. So am I allowed to use words of more than 2 syllables?
What I want you to do, Tim, is look across the desk at Jim, and I just don't want you to use any words that you don't think Jim would understand.
That's a fair deal.
Okay.
I'll buy it.
All right, so it's 2 syllables only this morning.
2 syllables only.
All right. How surprised were you? Obviously, you were disappointed. How surprised were you a deal wasn't struck in Hawaii?
Well, I was very surprised to hear that a much bigger issue in terms of the global scheme of things, autos, was still a fundamental problem. That really was a shock to me.
So did you think that that had basically been nutted out?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not involved in that side of the discussion, obviously. But no, we were gobsmacked. But the extraordinary thing was that the Mexicans and the Canadians were also gobsmacked, and they are fully integrated into the North American supply chain.
Yeah,
so
in the auto industry.
That was a surprise.
All right. So what is the chance then that forgetting about dairy, autos could bring the whole TPP to a crashing halt?
Oh, they have to sort out dairy and they have to sort out autos. Those are the 2 big issues.
Can it be done?
Oh, yes, it can be done.
Can it be done in time?
Well, this is, how long's a piece of string issue. I mean, what is the real timetable? Nobody really knows the answer to that, Paul. I think the thing is we don't want to lose momentum. That's what happened in Geneva with these Doha talks. Completely lost momentum.
Well, you're the only person that remembers Doha now.
It's a fair comment, yeah.
All right, so when you say how long is a piece of string, does the piece of string end with the Canadian elections or does it end with the American elections?
Well, my discussions with the Canadian minister and his team indicate to me that although they've dropped the writ and they're starting the election, and although both autos and dairy are very sensitive, they are prepared to negotiate during the election campaign.
All right. Dairy is vital for us. I mean, there will be people, and there were people, commentators, who thought you were going to go over there just to rubber stamp some deal, even if we couldn't get what we want. Clearly, you are not going to do that, but we are clearly going to have to negotiate. We are not going to get free trade, absolute free trade on dairy with this deal, are we?
Well, we won't get complete free trade in everything, just as we didn't in, several other deals. In some deals we can do it. In Taiwan, for example, that deal's gone ahead brilliantly. Our exports are just going through the roof. In Korea, we got complete free trade in butter, the 2 cheeses we wanted, infant formula, but not everything. So I don't know quite what we'll get, but we're not going to settle for what's on the table now. That's as simple as that.
Okay, so given that there is a time constraint, how much more has to come forward in dairy for you to be able to say this is a good enough deal for us to put up with the roundabouts? The swings are in our favour, we can put up with the roundabouts. How much more do we have to get than is on the table at the moment?
Well, apparently I'm public enemy number 1 in Japan, and I'm going off after this to do an interview with their news media. They'll ask me the same question, and I hope you'll understand that for negotiating reasons, I'm not going to put numbers on it. It would just make any compromise between us and Japan and us and the Canadians and finally us and the Americans more difficult. But so, we need a deal that makes sense to New Zealand. We don't have that deal on dairy. Everything else looks very good.
Who's our biggest... Well, it only looks... Yeah, well, you say that. Everything else only looks very good if we get the good deal on dairy.
No, everything else on all of our other exports except dairy does indeed look very good. But, I've been saying this, we can't win this political argument at the moment in New Zealand because I can't reveal what I know for negotiating
reasons.
Which
actually tends to be the deal in negotiations anyway.
Absolutely.
And there seem to be many commentators that don't understand that. I am not one of them. All right, so who's our sticking point? Is it Canada?
All 3 of them. And they're locked in this triangle, this sort of protectionist triangle, and it's very difficult to break in.
So the Americans are more on our side, but of course they're more on Canada's side than ours. So it would be if Canada wasn't in the loop, we'd be able to do the deal with America quite easily.
The problem with the American dairy industry is they do not know how strong they are. Look, only 10 years ago, only 5% of US milk was exported. It's 15%. They're the world's largest skim milk exporter.
They're strong, but they're very frightened, aren't they?
They are looking through the rear vision mirror. They're not looking through the front screen as to where they're going. And this is the problem. Their politics haven't caught up with where their industry is.
All right. What happens? I mean, there are three things that could happen here, I think. Either we sign the deal and it's fine. No one signs the deal and everyone walks away, which to me is looking the most likely, but I'm not as close to it as you, obviously. For some reason, they didn't ask me along. Or number three, the others sign it, but we don't. Is that a possibility? What sort of position would that put us in? If you honestly can't say to New Zealand, this was a great dairy deal, so I've signed it. If we don't sign it and the TPP goes ahead without us, what position does that put us in?
Nobody can push New Zealand out of this negotiation. But of course, yes, we could take ourselves out of this negotiation. And I'm just not going to put New Zealand into that ridiculous choice, so we negotiate.
Okay, so what you're saying is my third option isn't on the table. We will not pull out. If the deal is going to be signed, we will be there.
Well, I have to retain a certain degree of ambiguity here, Paul. That's all I'm prepared to say.
Okay. But do you see what I'm meaning, though, with regard to us not signing and everyone else signing? I mean, is it almost better to be in the tent with a bad deal than out of the tent?
Well, we're not going to sign for a bad deal. We are going to sign for a deal that makes net sense to New Zealand, as the Prime Minister has continually pointed out. When the Cabinet is able to make a calculation on whether this is in the net benefit of New Zealand, then we will make a decision.
Okay.
We're not at that point.
Let me go back to that point you made, that this deal, that no one can push us out. Does that mean that if we're not happy with the deal and we say we're not signing it now, the deal can't go ahead with anyone?
Well, we'll wait and see what happens.
But could it potentially mean that? Could any one country, could New Zealand, for instance, say, this deal is not on, we're not signing it yet, which means there is no TPP for anyone?
Well, I think people would be extremely reluctant to see any country fall off the back of the truck.
How worried are you about dairy prices?
Well, obviously, we're deeply concerned for our farmers. I mean, we've seen, while it's all very well to say we've seen this before, milk production has gone up around the world. We don't know where the bottom of this market is. But look, we shouldn't lose confidence in our country's future. We are doing very well by international standards. And these trade deals are part of that. We'll see our way through this commodity price fluctuation, just as we've seen our way through in the last 100 years.
And even although the TPP is not going to affect commodity prices as such, it will be more favourable trading terms. So in a situation such as the one we're in now, which is a disaster for dairy in terms of the payout, particularly for whole milk, if we had a TPP on favourable dairy conditions, it would help us weather the storm.
Well, absolutely. The reason why dairy prices fluctuate so wildly is because international trade is such a small proportion of total global production. New Zealand, people go on about New Zealand being a large dairy exporter. We're a large exporter, but we're a very small producer. We produce less than 3% of the world's milk. So if we can open up more markets, the fluctuations will be less severe than they would have otherwise been.
All right. When are the next talks, do you know?
Well, they've already started. I mean,
so they've started on the phone?
Well, on the phone. They've started in terms of the normal diplomatic process. My chief negotiator will be getting on a plane anytime soon. Not quite sure where we're going to send him. So there's no let up here.
When will you all get together again, do you know?
Well, we did try to fix a date around the table just prior to the press conference and found it impossible to get a scheduling thing worked out. So the answer is everybody knows informally we have to maintain momentum, because if we lose that, we're dead.
Okay, and just finally, when will you know it's too late? If you can't all get around a table by the end of this month, will it be too late?
Well, it's not so much the Canadian election, it's the US presidential election that's bearing down on us. And at what point does the United States get so engrossed in the domestic political scene there that it can't take decisions? Actually, nobody knows. I'm not sure that President Obama, if he were here on your program, would be able to answer that precisely.
He's on tomorrow, I think.
On tomorrow,
yeah.
Excellent.
Oh, hang on. No, he's not. All right, Tim.
All right.
We'll let you get back to the phone. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for keeping it simple for Jim.